My name is Dennis, and I was just 16 when cancer took my mom from me. What I didn't know then was that her final act of love, leaving me a substantial inheritance in trust, would become the target of my own father's greed. For years, he and my stepmom Stephanie thought they were cleverly draining my future while crushing my spirit. They had a perfect plan and a legal loophole, but they made one critical mistake: they underestimated me. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on their scheme, let me know where you're watching from. If this story of family betrayal and justice sounds interesting, hit that like and subscribe button as I reveal how I outsmarted those who were supposed to protect me. Growing up, I was surrounded by love, especially from my mom, Elaine. She was brilliant, a financial advisor who helped dozens of families secure their futures. Our home in the suburbs of Boston was modest but comfortable. Mom always said, "We live within our means, Dennis, so we can dream beyond them." She taught me the value of money, early setting up my first savings account when I was 7. We'd sit at the kitchen table every month, and she'd help me divide my allowance into saving, spending, and giving jars. Those moments seem so precious now. My father, Brian, was less involved in these life lessons. He worked in real estate development, which kept him busy with long hours and frequent business trips. When he was home, there was often tension simmering between my parents. I wasn't completely surprised when they sat me down just after my 12th birthday to tell me they were getting divorced. "Sometimes adults fall out of love," Dennis' mom explained gently. "This isn't your fault, and we both love you very much." What she didn't say, what I found out later through overheard conversations, was that Dad had been having an affair with Stephanie, his administrative assistant. She was 15 years younger than him, with sleek blonde hair and a laugh that seemed to command attention in any room. Dad moved out the following week. The divorce was finalized quickly. Mom kept our family home, and I stayed with her, visiting Dad every other weekend at his new downtown apartment. Stephanie was never there during my visits for the first year, though I knew they were seeing each other. Dad probably thought he was protecting me, but it just made everything feel artificial. Life settled into a new normal. Mom threw herself into her work, and I adjusted to being the man of the house, taking on more chores and responsibilities. Despite the divorce, Mom never spoke ill of Dad in front of me. "He's still your father, Dennis," she'd remind me. "Our issues are between us adults." Then came the day that changed everything. I was 15 when Mom started experiencing persistent headaches. After weeks of them not improving, she finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis was devastating: stage IV brain cancer. The prognosis was bleak: 6 months to a year. I remember sitting in the sterile hospital consultation room, watching Mom take notes about treatment options, with the same methodical approach she used for financial planning while I struggled to breathe. Mom being Mom, she immediately began planning. Not just her treatment, but everything that would come after. She updated her will and established a trust fund for me using her life insurance savings and investment portfolio. She spent hours with her attorney making sure every detail was perfect. "I need to know you'll be taken care of, Dennis," she told me one evening. "The trust will provide for your education and needs until you're old enough to manage it yourself." The trust was structured carefully. I would gain full control when I turned 25. Until then, my father would serve as trustee with a monthly allowance provided to me for personal expenses. A larger portion was allocated for my maintenance, housing, food, healthcare, education, to be managed by Dad. Mom's attorney, Sarah Palmer, would provide oversight, though her power was limited by the trust's terms. Mom fought hard, enduring radiation and chemotherapy that ravaged her body but couldn't touch her spirit. Despite her determination, the cancer progressed rapidly. By my 16th birthday, she was in hospice care at home. She died 3 weeks later, holding my hand and telling me she loved me. I was shattered. The world seemed colorless and cold without her. Dad moved back into our family home to care for me, which seemed considerate at first. Then came the bombshell. Just 3 months after Mom's funeral, he announced he was marrying Stephanie. I was still wearing grief like a second skin when she moved in, bringing her minimalist aesthetic and her 2 children from a previous marriage. Todd, 14, and Amber, 12. Our family photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by abstract art and new family portraits that featured everyone but Mom and sometimes me. Mom's garden, which had been her pride and joy, was ripped out for a more modern landscape design that Stephanie preferred. Her clothes were donated before I had a chance to decide if there was anything I wanted to keep. It was as if they were erasing her existence, and with it part of mine. The atmosphere at home transformed completely. Where once there had been warmth and laughter now, there was Stephanie's constant criticism and Dad's uncomfortable silence. I noticed they began taking lavish vacations, bought a new luxury SUV, and renovated the kitchen with high-end appliances, all while telling me we needed to be budget-conscious about my expenses. Every time I asked about money for school activities or basic needs, Dad would sigh and say, "The trust only provides so much, Dennis. We need to be responsible." Yet somehow, there was always enough for Stephanie's shopping sprees and Todd's expensive gaming equipment. I didn't understand then that they were using the maintenance funds from my trust money intended for my care to finance their upgraded lifestyle. That realization would come later, with devastating clarity. My senior year of high school began just 6 months after Mom died, and 4 weeks after Stephanie officially became my stepmother. I returned to school feeling like a ghost drifting through hallways, barely recognized by classmates who didn't know what to say to the kid whose mom died. Home, which should have been my sanctuary, had become foreign territory. Stephanie wasted no time establishing her authority. "This is my house." Now she reminded me constantly. Though technically, it was still in my mother's name and part of my trust. She implemented new rules that seemed designed specifically to make me uncomfortable. My curfew was 9 p.m. sharp, even on weekends, while Todd and Amber could stay out until 11. I was assigned a list of daily chores that grew longer each week, while her children mysteriously had too much homework to help around the house. At first, I thought she was just struggling to blend our families. I tried reaching out, asking about her day, or offering to help with dinner. Her responses were clipped. Her attention quickly diverted to her own children. Todd needs help with his science project, or Amber has dance practice. My attempts at connection were consistently rebuffed. Dad, meanwhile, became increasingly distant. He worked later hours and, when home, retreated to his study with a tumbler of whiskey. When I approached him about Stephanie's treatment, he dismissed my concerns. "She's adjusting to a lot of changes too, Dennis. Try to be more understanding." His voice held an edge of irritation, as if I were an inconvenience rather than his grieving son. One evening I was in the kitchen finishing homework when I overheard them talking in the adjacent dining room. They didn't realize I was home. "The monthly statements came from the trust," Dad said quietly. "We need to be careful about how we document these expenses." "Relax," Brian Stephanie replied. "The boy doesn't pay attention to anything. As long as we keep him focused on his little problems, he'll never look at the bigger picture." Their laughter sent a chill through me. I didn't fully understand what they were discussing, but the secretive tone made my stomach knot. That night marked the first time I felt truly unsafe in my own home. The changes accelerated after that conversation. My bedroom, the one I'd had since childhood, was suddenly needed for Stephanie's home office. I was relocated to the smallest bedroom in the house, a former guest room with barely enough space for a twin bed and desk. Many of my belongings mysteriously didn't make the move, including a box of letters Mom had written me for future birthdays and graduations. When I asked about the missing items, Stephanie looked confused. "I thought you said you didn't want those old things anymore." "They've been donated." I never said any such thing, but Dad backed her version of events, making me question my own memory. Todd and Amber, taking cues from their mother, began treating me like an unwelcome house guest. They entered my room without permission, borrowed things without asking, and returned them damaged, if at all. When I complained, Stephanie accused me of being possessive and unwilling to share with family. The financial disparities became increasingly obvious. While Todd got the latest iPhone and Amber received expensive dance lessons, I was told there wasn't money for my SAT prep course. My request for new winter boots was deemed extravagant, while Stephanie wore designer labels. I started working weekends at a local grocery store just to have personal spending money, despite the trust supposedly providing an allowance that I rarely received in full. The most alarming development came during college application season. I'd always been a strong student, and Mom had emphasized the importance of higher education. I'd assumed the trust would cover my college expenses. That was certainly Mom's intention. But when I asked Dad to complete the parent sections of financial aid forms, he repeatedly forgot or was too busy. As deadlines approached, his excuses evolved. "Maybe you should consider community college first," he suggested. "Or take a gap year to figure out what you really want." When I pressed, pointing out that Mom had specifically established the trust for my education, his face hardened. "The trust has limitations, Dennis. There are other expenses to consider." What other expenses could possibly take priority over the very purpose of the trust? I couldn't understand it, and Dad refused to elaborate. My 18th birthday arrived with little fanfare. While Todd's birthday 2 months earlier had featured a backyard party with 50 guests, mine was acknowledged with a store-bought cake and a card signed only by Dad. Stephanie and her children were mysteriously not feeling well that evening. The card contained a gift certificate for a clothing store with a handwritten note specifying it was for professional attire for job interviews. The message was clear: don't expect support beyond high school. Something was very wrong, but I couldn't yet piece together what they were planning. I just knew that with each passing month, the distance between the future Mom had envisioned for me and the one taking shape grew wider. At 19, I was living a double life. On paper, I was still part of the family, with a bedroom in the house and a place at occasional meals. In reality, I spent as little time at home as possible, dividing my hours between classes at the community college, 2 part-time jobs, and the public library, where I studied to avoid going home. Community college wasn't my first choice, but without Dad's cooperation on financial aid forms for 4-year universities, it was my only option. I cobbled together tuition from my jobs, and the irregular allowance from the trust, determined to at least get my associate's degree. The discovery that would change everything happened by complete accident. I had come home early from work due to a migraine, hoping to lie down in my room unnoticed. The house was quiet, Dad's car was gone, and Stephanie had taken Todd and Amber to one of their endless extracurricular activities. As I passed Dad's home office, I noticed the door slightly ajar, unusual as he typically kept it locked. My head throbbing, I entered. Seeking the migraine medication I knew he kept in his desk. Opening the top drawer, I found the pills, but also noticed a folder labeled Trust Dennis Sullivan. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. The trust was supposed to be for my benefit. Didn't I have a right to know its details? Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and correspondence with the trust administrator. Most of it was financial jargon. I didn't fully understand, but a highlighted section on one document caught my eye. Beneficiary has 1 calendar year following their 18th birthday to contest any expenditures made by the trustee. After this period, all previously documented expenditures are considered approved by the beneficiary, and the trustee's management decisions become permanent. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. There was a loophole in the trust one that Dad and Stephanie had clearly discovered and were exploiting. If I didn't contest any misuse of funds within 1 year of turning 18, Dad would effectively gain permanent control over the trust that my mother had established for my future. With shaking hands, I continued searching through the folder. There were records of approved expenditures bearing what appeared to be my signature. Signatures I had never made. Kitchen renovations, landscaping services, the family trip to Cancun last Christmas, that I had been told I couldn't afford to join, all documented as necessary expenses for my benefit and welfare, all with my forged approval. Further in the stack, I found notes about the trust's original value, nearly $800,000 from Mom's life insurance and savings. The current balance was less than half that amount. In just 3 years, they had burned through over $400,000 meant for my education and future. I photographed as many documents as I could with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original place. Back in my room, I reviewed the images, trying to make sense of the extent of their betrayal. The dates became significant. I had turned 18 9 months ago. According to the trust terms, I had less than 3 months left to take action before they gained permanent control. That night, I lay awake, piecing together all the strange behaviors, all the gaslighting and mistreatment. It wasn't just ordinary family dysfunction or adjustment difficulties. They had been systematically making my life miserable for a purpose, to distract me from what they were doing with my inheritance. Every time they made me feel unwelcome. Every time they denied me basic necessities while indulging themselves. They were buying time until that crucial 1-year mark passed. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later, when I intentionally came home early and positioned myself near Dad's study, where I could overhear his phone conversation with Stephanie. "Just 2 more months," he said in a hushed tone. "Once we pass the deadline, we can stop pretending. The house can go on the market next spring, and we'll have enough for that vacation property in Florida." "What about the college fund portion?" Stephanie asked. "Can we access that too, once we establish that he's not college material?" "Yes. We just need to document that community college isn't working out. His spotty attendance in that Monday class should help." The Monday class they referred to was one I often missed because Stephanie had accidentally locked me out of the house several Sundays, forcing me to sleep in my car and miss my morning class while finding somewhere to shower. "And he has no idea," Stephanie's voice was gleeful. "None. Too busy feeling sorry for himself to see what's happening. Elaine always did say he had her heart rather than my head for business." Their laughter felt like acid in my chest. The mention of my mother's name on their lips, while they systematically destroyed what she had built for me, was the final straw. The grief that had been my constant companion since her death transformed into something new, cold, clarifying anger. I had always believed that family meant protection and love. In one crushing moment, I realized that blood ties weren't guarantees of either. My father and his wife weren't family. They were thieves, stealing not just my money but the security and future my mother had sacrificed to provide. That night I made a vow to myself and to Mom's memory they would not win. I had less than 3 months to untangle their scheme, gather evidence, and take back control of my future. The path forward wasn't clear yet. But for the first time since Mom died, I had purpose again. They thought I was too broken to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As the 1-year deadline for my 18th birthday approached, Dad and Stephanie's treatment of me deteriorated from merely hostile to seemingly calculated cruelty. Looking back, I realized they were growing confident in their endgame, just a few more weeks of keeping me off balance, and they'd have permanent control of my inheritance. Their tactics escalated in both frequency and intensity. One weekend, I returned from my shift at the grocery store to find the house locks changed. I sat in my car for 4 hours before Dad finally answered my calls, claiming it was a security upgrade and they'd forgotten to give me the new key. This became a regular occurrence at least once a week. I'd find myself locked out sometimes overnight. "You should have called earlier," Dad would say dismissively, though my calls and texts went unanswered for hours. "We can't always be at your beck and call." My remaining possessions began disappearing at an alarming rate. The box containing the few photos I had of Mom vanished from under my bed. When confronted, Stephanie suggested I had probably thrown them away myself during one of my emotional episodes. I had never had an emotional episode, but Dad nodded sagely, as if this was a common occurrence. "Your memory hasn't been reliable since your mother passed," he told me with feigned concern. The grief counselor warned us about this. I had never seen a grief counselor. They had refused to pay for one when I asked shortly after Mom's death. The gaslighting was so constant that I started keeping a journal hidden in my car, documenting each incident to reassure myself I wasn't imagining things. My basic needs became bargaining chips. The refrigerator was fitted with a lock, with Stephanie claiming it was to prevent midnight snacking. I was given specific meal times outside of which I wasn't permitted to eat at home. When I worked evening shifts and missed dinner, there were no leftovers saved for me. You should budget your allowance for meals out if you choose to work during family dinner. Stephanie would say, though, my allowance from the trust had become erratic and insufficient when I received it at all. The psychological warfare extended beyond the home. Dad began making comments to extended family about being concerned about my ability to function independently. "Dennis seems unable to manage basic adult responsibilities," he told my Aunt Carol during a call I overheard. "We're worried about his future. Elaine would be so disappointed in how he's turning out." Invoking my mother's potential disappointment was a particularly effective weapon against me. Each time Dad suggested I was failing to live up to her hopes, it cut deep. I knew Mom would never be disappointed in me for struggling against their abuse, but the words still stung. Stephanie's children became more emboldened in their mistreatment as the deadline drew closer. Todd accidentally spilled soda on my laptop, destroying my only means of completing college assignments. When I asked Dad for trust funds to repair or replace it, he lectured me on responsibility for personal property and suggested I should save up from my minimum wage job. Meanwhile, Amber received a new MacBook because her Instagram influencer career needed professional equipment. She had fewer than 300 followers, but this was deemed a worthwhile investment while my education hung in the balance. Family gatherings became minefields. At Thanksgiving dinner with Dad's parents and siblings, Stephanie orchestrated a conversation about troubled young adults who can't launch. "We're trying everything to motivate Dennis," she said, with a manufactured sigh. "But he seems resistant to growing up. The community college attendance is spotty, and he can't seem to hold a job." This was patently false. I maintained a 3.8 GPA despite everything, and had kept the same 2 part-time jobs for over a year. When I tried to defend myself, Dad cut me off. "Let's not air our dirty laundry at dinner, son." His tone carried a warning, and the family quickly changed subjects, leaving me painted as the unstable problem child. By December, just weeks before the trust deadline, I had been uninvited from the family Christmas vacation to Hawaii, a trip undoubtedly financed with my trust funds. Instead, I was told to house-sit, though. This transparently meant I was not welcome on a family vacation. The day they left, I found a typed list of daily chores taped to the refrigerator with a note that completion would be verified by our security cameras. My bedroom door lock had been removed, and new cameras had indeed been installed throughout the house. I reached my breaking point the day after Christmas, when I returned from my shift to find my room had been deep cleaned. My mattress was stripped. My clothes were piled in trash bags in the garage, and the desk where I studied had been removed to create space. I was told I could sleep on the couch until they figured out a more permanent solution. The message was clear. With just weeks until the trust deadline, they were making their final push to break me completely. My physical health began to suffer. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and experienced panic attacks. Focusing on classes became nearly impossible. I tried one last direct approach, confronting Dad in his study when Stephanie was out. "I know what you're doing with Mom's trust," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This was meant for my future, not for your lifestyle or Stephanie's children." His expression shifted from surprise to cold anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. Your mother left me as trustee because she knew you weren't capable of making financial decisions. That's not true. She left it in trust until I turned 25 because that was standard legal advice, not because she didn't trust me. Dad's laugh was dismissive. You think you knew your mother better than I did. I was married to her for 15 years, and cheating on her, for how many of those? The words escaped before I could stop them. His face darkened. You're on dangerous ground, Dennis. Remember who controls your future. One call to the trust administrator about your mental instability and drug use, and you could be disqualified as a beneficiary entirely. Drug use. I've never used drugs. I was genuinely shocked. Who would they believe? A respected real estate developer or an unstable college dropout? Think carefully about your next move. You still need a place to live, don't you? The threat was unmistakable. They weren't just trying to steal my inheritance, they were prepared to destroy my reputation and possibly my entire future if I fought back. As I left his study, I knew I had run out of options for a peaceful resolution. This was no longer just about money. It was about survival. That night, sleeping in my car, parked several blocks from the house, I made my final decision. The time for hoping they might remember their humanity, that Dad might remember he was my father, was over. I would fight back with every resource I could find, and I would win. Not just for my financial future, but for Mom's legacy and for my own self-respect. With just 3 weeks left before the trust deadline, I began implementing the plan that would change everything. With the clock ticking toward the 1-year deadline, I knew I needed expert help. The morning after Dad's threat, I skipped my classes and drove to the offices of Palmer & Associates, my mother's former law firm. I had no appointment and little hope they would see me, but I was desperate. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. Dennis Sullivan, Elaine's son. Her face softened with genuine warmth. I was so sorry to hear about your mother. She was wonderful to work with. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Sarah Palmer, Mom's colleague and friend. She had helped draft the trust and seemed genuinely disturbed by my situation. Your mother was meticulous in her planning, Sarah said, reviewing the photos of documents I'd taken. She never intended for the trust to be used this way. Can anything be done? I asked. The 1-year deadline is only 3 weeks away. Sarah's expression was grave but determined. Yes, but we need to move quickly and strategically. First, we need to document everything and file for an emergency injunction to freeze the trust. Over the next week, I split my time between work classes and secret meetings with Sarah and a forensic accountant named Michael Ramos, who specialized in trust mismanagement cases. I provided them with everything I had gathered: photos of documents, journal entries, detailing the psychological abuse recordings of conversations, Ohio being a one-party consent state for recording, and bank statements showing the one-party consent state. Irregular allowance payments. What they're doing isn't just morally wrong, Michael explained after reviewing the evidence. It's legally fraudulent. These signatures are clearly forged, and these expenditures, like the kitchen renovation and family vacations, cannot reasonably be construed as for your benefit. Sarah advised me to continue behaving normally at home, a nearly impossible task given my anxiety and anger. Don't give them any reason to suspect you're taking action. If they realize you're building a case, they might accelerate their spending or try to move assets where we can't trace them. This meant enduring more of their psychological warfare while smiling through gritted teeth. Each day was an exercise in restraint, especially when Stephanie accidentally dropped comments about their plans for after the deadline. We're thinking of converting your room into a home gym once you're settled elsewhere. She mentioned casually over a rare dinner I was permitted to attend. Young adults need to learn independence, after all. Meanwhile, I was building a comprehensive dossier of their misdeeds. Working with Michael, we created a detailed timeline of trust fund misuse, categorizing expenditures as either legitimate or fraudulent. The numbers were staggering. Of the approximately $400,000 they had spent from the trust, less than 15% had actually gone to my care and education. Sarah also helped me locate my mother's former assistant, Jennifer Blake, who had been present during some of the trust planning discussions. Jennifer provided a sworn affidavit about Mom's intentions for the trust. Elaine was explicit that the funds were for Dennis's education and welfare, her statement read. She specifically discussed her concerns about Brian's financial judgment and wanted safeguards in place. The most painful but necessary part of my preparation was reading through Mom's personal journals, which Sarah had kept copies of, as part of the estate planning process. Mom had documented her concerns about Dad's financial decisions during their marriage and her fears about his influence on me. Brian sees money as a means to status, she wrote. I worry about the values Dennis will absorb if Brian has too much control over his financial future. Reading her private thoughts was like hearing her voice again, prescient, protective, and painfully accurate in her assessment of the man Dad had become. While building the legal case, I also had to prepare for practical realities. I knew that once I made my move, living in Dad's house would no longer be an option. I worked extra shifts at both jobs, saving every penny. A co-worker at the grocery store offered me his sofa until I could find permanent housing. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, using my work address for correspondence. With Sarah's help, I also connected with the trust administrator, bypassing Dad. The administrator, initially skeptical, became increasingly concerned as we presented evidence of the misappropriation. He agreed to review the documentation and consider an emergency freeze. The final piece fell into place when Sarah discovered a crucial detail in the trust document that Dad had apparently overlooked. While beneficiaries had 1 year to contest specific expenditures, there was a separate clause addressing trustee fraud. In the event of demonstrable fraud or gross mismanagement by the trustee, the time limitation for contesting expenditures shall be suspended, and all transactions shall be subject to review. This was our ace in the hole if we could prove fraud. The 1-year deadline became irrelevant. With this knowledge, we finalized our strategy for confrontation. Timing is critical, Sarah advised during our final planning meeting. We need to present the evidence directly to your father. File the emergency injunction and secure your personal safety, all within a very short window. The plan was set: we would confront Dad and Stephanie 10 days before the deadline, with all legal documents prepared in advance. This would give us time to respond to any countermoves they might make. The night before our planned confrontation, I lay awake on the floor of what used to be my bedroom, surrounded by trash bags containing what remained of my possessions. My stomach churned with anxiety, but beneath the fear was a steady current of resolve. Mom had fought through pain and exhaustion to secure my future. I would honor her struggle by fighting for that future with everything I had. Tomorrow would change everything. Either I would reclaim my inheritance and my dignity, or I would lose both. There was no middle ground left. As dawn broke, I sent a text message to Sarah Reddy. The morning of the confrontation, I woke early and moved through my routine with mechanical precision. My few remaining possessions were already in my car, parked a block away. I had no intention of returning to this house once the day was done. At precisely 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Dad and Stephanie were both home. Dad worked from home on Wednesdays, and Stephanie rarely left before noon. I answered the door, greeting Sarah Palmer and Michael Ramos with a handshake as if they were strangers. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan," Sarah asked formally. "I'm Sarah Palmer, attorney at law. This is Michael Ramos, forensic accountant. We have an urgent matter to discuss regarding the Elaine Sullivan Trust for Dennis Sullivan. May we come in?" Dad appeared in the hallway, his face registering confusion that quickly shifted to alarm when he recognized Sarah. "What is this about?" he demanded, looking between me and the visitors. "I believe it's in everyone's best interest to discuss this privately," Sarah replied calmly. Unless you'd prefer to have this conversation on your front porch where your neighbors can observe. Stephanie emerged from the kitchen, her usual confident demeanor faltering slightly. Brian, what's going on? Dad reluctantly ushered everyone into the living room. Once seated, Sarah placed a thick binder on the coffee table. We're here regarding serious concerns about the management of Dennis's trust fund, she began. As the attorney who helped Elaine establish this trust, I have a professional obligation to ensure her wishes are being honored. This is ridiculous, Dad interrupted. I'm the designated trustee. I don't have to justify my management decisions to you. Actually, Mr. Sullivan, you do. Michael opened his laptop. When there's evidence of systematic fraud and misappropriation, the trustee is accountable to both the beneficiary and the court. For the next 30 minutes, Michael methodically presented evidence of their misuse of the trust. The forged signatures, the expenditures that clearly benefited only Dad and Stephanie, the pattern of increasing withdrawals as the one-year deadline approached. This home renovation alone, Michael pointed to a spreadsheet, cost $94,000, none of which can reasonably be claimed as necessary for Dennis's welfare. Stephanie's face had drained of color. Those renovations were necessary for maintaining property value. The trust owns this house, so it's a legitimate expense. The trust owns this house for Dennis's benefit, Sarah corrected. Kitchen upgrades using imported Italian marble and a home theater system don't qualify as maintenance. Dad's initial shock had hardened into anger. This is how you repay everything we've done for you, he demanded, turning to me. We gave you a home when your mother died. We fed and clothed you. No, Dad, I said, finding my voice at last. Mom provided for me through her trust. You and Stephanie have been systematically stealing what she left to secure my future. You. Ungrateful little Stephanie began. But Dad cut her off with a warning look. This is all a misunderstanding, he said, his tone shifting to one of reasonable concern. Dennis has been troubled since Elaine's death. He's been experiencing paranoid thoughts, missing classes. We've been worried about his mental health. Sarah was prepared for this tactic. We have affidavits from Dennis's professors, confirming his excellent academic standing despite difficult circumstances. We also have documentation of the systematic emotional abuse and neglect he's experienced in this home. She produced another folder containing my journal entries, correspondence with professors and statements from coworkers who had witnessed my declining physical condition and the occasions when I had been locked out of the house. Additionally, Sarah continued, we have this. She placed a final document on the table, a copy of Mom's personal letter to the trust administrator, expressing her concerns about Dad's financial management and explicitly stating her wishes for the trust. Dad's face reddened. That letter has no legal standing. The trust document is what matters, and it gives me discretion over expenditures. It does, Sarah acknowledged, but it also contains a fraud clause that suspends the one-year limitation period in cases of demonstrable fraud. Between the forged signatures and the clearly personal expenses disguised as maintenance costs, we have more than enough evidence of fraud. She handed Dad a blue document folder. This is a notice of legal action to remove you, as trustee freeze all trust assets pending review and require full accounting and repayment of misappropriated funds. We filed with the court this morning, and the judge has granted an emergency injunction. The trust is frozen effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder and scanned the contents. Stephanie broke first. You can't do this, she shrieked, jumping to her feet. We've done nothing wrong. Tell them Brian. Dad's lawyer instincts finally kicked in. We should not continue this conversation without our attorney present, he said stiffly. I'll have our counsel review these allegations. That's your right. Sarah agreed. However, you should know that we've already spoken with the district attorney's office. They're very interested in the forgery aspect of this case. Forging signatures on financial documents is criminal fraud in this state. This was the moment when I realized we had won. The mention of criminal charges transformed Dad's anger into fear. He was willing to fight over money, but the prospect of criminal prosecution with potential damage to his professional reputation and possibly even jail time was clearly not a risk he was prepared to take. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Sarah outlined our terms. Dad would resign as trustee to be replaced by an independent fiduciary selected by the court. He and Stephanie would provide a full accounting of all trust expenditures and repay all misappropriated funds. In exchange, we would not pursue criminal charges for the forgeries. Additionally, Sarah added, "Dennis will be moving out today. You will forward any mail or personal items belonging to him to my office. There will be no contact unless initiated by Dennis." Dad looked at me then. Really looked at me perhaps for the first time in years. I expected to see hatred or at least resentment. But what I saw instead was something like recognition, as if he was finally seeing me as a person rather than an obstacle or a resource to be exploited. "You're so much like your mother," he said softly, and for once it didn't sound like an accusation. The meeting concluded with an agreement that all parties would meet with the court-appointed trustee the following week. As Sarah and Michael packed their documents, Stephanie made one last attempt to salvage something. "What about the house?" she demanded. "We've been living here making improvements. We have rights as occupants." "The house belongs to the trust," Sarah explained patiently. "The new trustee will determine appropriate next steps. But I would suggest you begin looking for alternative housing." As we walked out the front door, I felt a strange lightness, not happiness exactly, but relief mixed with vindication. I didn't look back at the house that had once been my home. There was nothing there for me anymore. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The court appointed Marjorie Winters, a respected trust administrator, as the new trustee. Her first action was to order a complete forensic audit of the trust, which ultimately confirmed misappropriation of approximately $380,000. Dad and Stephanie did not contest the findings. Whether motivated by fear of criminal charges, or perhaps some belated recognition of their wrongdoing, they agreed to a repayment plan that included liquidating assets and taking out a second mortgage on a condo they had purchased the previous year. The court hearing to finalize the arrangements was tense but anticlimactic. Judge Eleanor Reeves reviewed the evidence and the settlement agreement, then addressed me directly. "Mr. Sullivan, your mother clearly went to great lengths to protect your future. I believe she would be proud of the courage and determination you've shown in protecting her legacy." Dad and Stephanie did not meet my eyes as they left the courtroom. Todd and Amber, who had attended the hearing, looked confused and angry. They had clearly been told a different version of events. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy for them. They, too, were victims of their parents' deception, though in a very different way. As news of the legal proceedings spread through our extended family and social circle, reactions were mixed. Some relatives expressed shock and support for me, while others sided with Dad, accepting his sanitized version of events. I learned quickly who truly cared about my welfare and who simply wanted to avoid uncomfortable truths. The most surprising reaction came from Dad's parents, my grandparents, who reached out through Sarah to express their dismay at their son's actions and their desire to maintain a relationship with me. That bridge would take time to rebuild, but I was open to trying. By the time the dust settled, I had secured not just my financial future, but also my independence. The trust was now properly managed, providing for my education and basic needs as Mom had intended. The family home was sold with the proceeds returned to the trust. And I had learned lessons about self-advocacy and resilience that would serve me long after the money was gone. When the final court documents were signed, Sarah handed me a sealed envelope. "Your mother left this with me," she explained. She asked that I give it to you if there were ever serious problems with the trust. I think now is the right time. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mom, dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Dennis, if you're reading this, it means you've faced challenges with the trust I established for you. I'm so sorry for any pain this has caused. Please know that my greatest wish was to protect your future and give you the foundation to build a life of purpose and joy. Trust your instincts. You have always had a good heart and a clear sense of right and wrong. These qualities will guide you better than any advice I could leave behind. I love you without condition or limit. Whatever happens, remember that no amount of money or property is more valuable than your integrity and self-respect. All my love, Mom. Her words, reaching across time and beyond death, were the final victory. A reminder that what I had fought for was not just money, but the principles and love she had instilled in me. In protecting her legacy, I had discovered my own strength. The first night in my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit I could afford, with the properly managed trust funds, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes containing what remained of my belongings, and what Sarah had salvaged from Mom's personal effects. The silence was deafening after years of walking on eggshells in a hostile household. This space, though small, was mine. No one could lock me out, criticize my presence, or make me feel unwelcome. The relief was so overwhelming, I simply sat and breathed, letting tears flow freely for the first time in years. The following months were a period of adjustment and healing. With the trust now properly managed by Marjorie Winters, I received regular monthly allowances as originally intended. The amount wasn't extravagant. Mom had structured the trust to provide security, not luxury, but it was consistent and sufficient for my needs. Most importantly, the educational portion was now properly allocated, allowing me to transfer to State University the following semester to pursue my business degree. Practical security was only the beginning of my healing journey. The psychological impact of years of gaslighting and emotional abuse couldn't be erased by a favorable court ruling. Sarah connected me with Dr. Rachel Cohen, a therapist specializing in family trauma and betrayal. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my new life. What you're experiencing is a complex grief, Dr. Cohen explained during one session. You're mourning not just your mother, but also the father you thought you had, and the family security you lost. Through therapy, I began to untangle the web of manipulation and recognize the subtle ways Dad and Stephanie had undermined my self-confidence and distorted my perception of reality. I learned to identify thought patterns that weren't truly mine, the tendency to question my own memory, the habit of minimizing my needs, the instinctive assumption that I was somehow always at fault. Recovery isn't linear, Dr. Cohen reminded me often. There will be setbacks and difficult days. That's normal and expected. She was right. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of everything I had lost threatened to crush me. But gradually those days became less frequent. I began building a new support network, classmates who became study partners, professors who took an interest in my academic progress, neighbors who checked in with simple kindness. My relationship with extended family evolved as well. Some relatives, like Dad's sister Aunt Carol, reached out with genuine remorse for having believed Dad's narrative about my instability. Others maintained distance, uncomfortable with acknowledging what had happened, or unwilling to choose sides. I learned to accept these varying responses without taking them personally. Dad made several attempts to re-establish contact as the months passed. First came a generic birthday card with a gift certificate eerily similar to his pattern before the confrontation. I returned it unopened through Sarah. Then came emails expressing vague regret for how things turned out, but notably lacking any specific acknowledgement of his actions. or the harm caused. I didn't respond. 6 months after the court ruling, he requested a meeting to clear the air. After discussing it with Dr. Cohen, I agreed to meet in a neutral location, a coffee shop near campus with clear boundaries established in advance. The conversation was strained and ultimately unproductive. Dad seemed to want absolution without accountability, a restoration of our relationship without the necessary foundation of trust. I did what I thought was best at the time he insisted. Stephanie and I made some mistakes in how we handled things, but our intentions weren't malicious. Forging my signature on financial documents wasn't malicious, I asked quietly. Locking me out of the house in winter wasn't malicious. Threatening to have me declared mentally unstable to gain control of my inheritance wasn't malicious. He had no adequate response, only deflections and minimizations. We parted with nothing resolved, but the meeting served a purpose. For me, it confirmed that my decision to establish firm boundaries was necessary for my well-being. Stephanie never attempted contact, though I occasionally heard about her through mutual acquaintances. She and Dad had downsized significantly to meet the repayment obligations, selling luxury items and moving to a smaller home in a less prestigious neighborhood. Their marriage was reportedly strained by the financial reversals and public embarrassment. Todd and Amber, now aware of at least some of what had happened, were struggling with their own sense of family identity. I felt sympathy for them, but maintained my distance. As my 21st birthday approached, I discovered a small lockbox among the items Sarah had recovered from Mom's possessions. Inside were letters she had written for various milestones: my 21st birthday, college graduation, future wedding day. Reading her words, I felt a bittersweet connection across the years. She had known she wouldn't be physically present for these moments, but had found a way to share her wisdom and love nonetheless. On your 21st birthday, she wrote, remember that adulthood isn't about age, but about the choices you make and the values you uphold. Choose kindness when possible, strength when necessary, and integrity always. Her advice resonated deeply as I navigated my new independence. I found myself making decisions by asking not what would benefit me most, but what aligned best with the values she had exemplified and taught. As my undergraduate studies progressed, I developed a particular interest in financial planning and estate law fields directly connected to my experiences. What had begun as a practical need to understand the legal battle over my trust evolved into a genuine academic passion. Professor James Martinez, noticing my engagement in his estate planning seminar, became a mentor, encouraging me to consider law school after graduation. Your personal experience gives you insight that can't be taught in classrooms, he observed. Combined with formal education, that perspective could make you an exceptional advocate for others. The idea of using my painful experience to help others facing similar situations was appealing. I began volunteering with a campus legal aid clinic, helping fellow students navigate financial aid complexities and tenant rights issues. Each person I assisted strengthened my conviction that I had found a meaningful direction. As my 25th birthday, the age when I would gain full control of the trust, drew closer, I worked with Marjorie to develop a comprehensive financial plan. The trust had recovered much of its value through careful management and the court-ordered repayments. Mom's prudent financial planning, temporarily derailed by Dad and Stephanie's greed, was back on track to serve its intended purpose. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this situation, Marjorie told me during one of our quarterly reviews. Not just recovering the assets, but how you've grown through the challenge. In honor of Mom and her legacy, I established a small scholarship at State University for students who had lost a parent to cancer. The Elaine Sullivan Memorial Scholarship wouldn't change the world, but it would help a few students each year face one less obstacle in their education, a fitting tribute to Mom's values and priorities. The journey from betrayal to recovery taught me lessons I never expected to learn so young. I discovered that family isn't defined by DNA, but by actions and choices, by who shows up when you're vulnerable, who tells you the truth when it's difficult, who celebrates your successes without envy. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting harm, but about preventing it from determining your future. Most importantly, I learned that while we can't control what happens to us, we can choose how we respond and who we become in the aftermath. Today, as I prepare to graduate with honors and begin law school, I no longer define myself primarily as someone who was betrayed by family. That chapter is part of my story, but it's not the whole narrative. I am also the son of a remarkable woman whose foresight and love continue to guide me. I am a student, a future attorney, a friend, a volunteer. I am someone who faced a devastating breach of trust and found the courage to fight back, not just for financial justice, but for the dignity and future my mother wanted me to have. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone who was supposed to protect you? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? I'd be interested to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in facing family betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Take care of yourselves, and trust your instincts, they're usually right.